On January 28, 1943, expectant mother Evelyn Henderson was visiting her in-laws in a quiet farming community outside of Kincardine, Ontario. That day, a massive snowstorm blanketed the area. That evening, she went into labor. With her husband recently transferred overseas with the Canadian military, her father-in-law, Will Henderson, hitched up the horses to a sleigh.
Roads were closed. My grandfather and grandmother had my mother on the back of a sleigh heading to Kincardine Hospital out on Lake Huron, and I was born before I got to the hospital, so born on skates, I guess.
When Paul turned 8, his dad, Garnet, bought him his first pair of skates. It wasn't long before Paul was playing minor hockey. He eventually signed with the Detroit Red Wings, his dad's favorite team, and began his junior career in Hamilton. Around that time, Paul met his lifelong sweetheart, Eleanor.
I was working in a grocery store in a little village of Lucknow, Ontario, and she came in one day with a friend of hers, and they were over by the lettuce, and so I made a full-court press, went over and tried to impress them.
It didn't take long for Paul to show Eleanor his intentions.
Well, I told her very early in our relationship that I was going to marry her. And she said, well, aren't you arrogant? But it probably took her about a year. And I think that well, maybe this guy might be okay after all.
In the spring of 1962, a few months before Eleanor and Paul tied the knot, Paul won the Memorial Cup with Hamilton. But with 1 year of junior hockey left, Paul actually considered walking away from his dream of being an NHL player.
Being fearful of being poor, I thought, I'm going to quit and I'm going to go get an education. My dad sat me down and I had a conversation with him, and he said, I know you can make it, and I think you know that too. Why don't you finish your junior career and give it a couple of years? If you can't make it in a couple of years, you can still go to school. So I played my last year of junior, really got serious about it, scored 49 goals, and then made the NHL my next year. So, but really thankful that was great advice from my dad.
As the popularity of hockey grew throughout the last century, so has the success of Canada's national teams. Up until the 1960s, Canada completely dominated the world stage, capturing gold at almost every Olympics and winning World Hockey Championships. But during the Cold War, a new contender to hockey supremacy emerged: the Soviet Union. By 1972, after dominating a decade of international hockey, the Soviet amateurs were eager to prove that they could beat the very best NHL professionals that Canada could offer.
Canada had invented the game. Canada owned the game in Canadians' minds. And so there was no way in the world that some usurper was going to come along and dominate our game and take it.
We discussed the many ways.
With both governments and the NHL in agreement, an 8-game exhibition summit series was planned. The games would be played prior to the 1972 NHL season, 4 in Canada, 4 in Moscow.
And it was such an iconic event. It was in the middle of the Cold War, and the Soviet Union and the West were at odds, and so this series took on an import that was well beyond hockey.
So if you had been writing the script, it couldn't have produced a more dramatic and exciting final. Tonight we are making hockey history.
With the series now tied at 3 wins apiece and a tie, the anticipation of deciding Game 8 grew to hysteria in Canada. The whole country paused to watch. With time ticking down and the game and series tied, Soviet officials claimed victory based on international rules for goal differential. This seemed to motivate Team Canada more.
Well, I jumped over the boards, Cornway had it at the far side. I yelled at him, and I was hoping to just one-time it. But the puck was too far out in front of me, and I fell into the boards, and I remember saying, I still have time.
Pass it on that wing. Here's a shot. Henderson made a wild stab for it.
Well, I got up immediately, and I saw Esposito whack it at Tretchett. I had about a foot to put it in and put it in the back of the net.
Here's another shot. Right by the door. Henderson has scored for Canada. And this crowd is going wild.
My dad had died in 1968, and I had never thought of my dad the whole series. Not when I scored the goal in the 7th game, but when the puck went over the line, I said out loud, and I had maybe a nanosecond of melancholy. I said out loud, Dad would have loved this one. You know, maybe that father-son connection is so deep, but I actually said, Dad would have loved this one.
And the fans of the team are going wild. Henderson right in front of the goal. 34 seconds left in the game.
I was probably one of the first guys over the boards, and I remember we all went over there and we were jumping on each other, and all I could hear was, we did it, we did it, we did it.
1926 is the time of Canada's 6th goal.
The reaction back home in Canada was astounding. Spontaneous celebrations erupted everywhere across the country.
I remember after the game, they interviewed me on television, and I remember saying, I have never felt more proud to be a Canadian in my life. Because I think any athlete, you want to wear the maple leaf. And we want to show the world, especially with hockey, I think, that we are the best.
One of the reasons I'm so proud of playing in this series and being a member of Team Canada 72 is that it brought our country together for 28 days in September. There were no Rocky Mountains, there were no Great Lakes, it was Canada.
I don't think any of us were prepared for the impact it had on the country. There's people to this day, 40 years later, come up and say, that was one of the greatest moments of my life when you scored that goal. We didn't understand it in '72, and I'm not sure we understand it today.